My daughter left her paralyzed son on my doorstep 11 years ago. No note, no goodbye, just a 5-year-old boy in a wheelchair and a bag that weighed less than my guilt for raising her wrong. I thought she'd be back in a week. She never came. I learned how to feed him through tubes, change his bandages, and whisper stories into nights that never slept. He never once complained. He just watched the world through a screen, quiet but sharp, like he was memorizing everything. Then one morning, that quiet boy built a 5 million app that could prove if something was real or fake. Ironic, isn't it? Because the day the world finally saw him, his mother came back with a lawyer claiming his money. Our own attorney said, "We might lose." My hands trembled, but my grandson turned to me. His voice calm through the machine and whispered, "Just let her talk. I'm about to share something close to my heart. But before I do, can you say hi in the comments or tell me where you're from? I love hearing how far my story reach. It's always good to know I'm not alone in this. Thank you. And now, let me tell you everything. If stories like mine move, you please subscribe or follow this channel. I'm Zafira Whitlow, a grandmother who learned that love sometimes begins the moment someone else walks away. Every word you hear from me is real because sometimes the truth itself is the only thing we have left. The snow was falling so thick it blurred the world into silence. That kind of silence that makes you hear your own breath, slow and hollow. It was late winter 2014, North Boulder, Colorado. I had just turned 61, retired after 35 years of teaching second grade. My life had finally settled into something quiet tea at 7 crossword, at 8 bed by 10. Peace was supposed to last, until the knock came. It wasn't the polite kind. It was desperate, rushed, uneven, like someone trying to outrun their own decision. When I opened the door, wind swept snow straight into my face, and there she was, Brielle, my daughter. Her hair was a tangled mess, her eyes swollen and sharp all at once. Beside her sat a boy in a worn wheelchair legs, wrapped in a blanket that didn't look warm enough for the night. "Mom," she said, voice trembling, but determined, "I just need a few days. Please, I need to rest. I need space." Calder, 5 years old, her son. My grandson didn't look up. His hands were shaking on the armrest, his lips blue from cold. I opened my mouth to ask questions. "Where have you been? What's happening?" But she was already putting a small backpack on my porch. "His clothes are in there," she said. "His meds, too." The bag looked too light for a weekend stay. "Brielle, wait. You can't just..." I turned to grab a blanket from the couch, but when I came back, her car lights were already fading down the snowy road. No kiss, no goodbye, just tire tracks vanishing into white. For a long minute, I stood in the doorway, the cold slicing through my robe. Calder's small voice broke the air. "Grandma, will Mom come back?" I swallowed the lie before I spoke it. "Of course she will, sweetheart, just a few days." But even as I said it, I knew the truth. I would never see my daughter again, not the version of her that was still human. I carried Calder inside. He was so light it frightened me. I noticed then that his legs didn't move, not even when I took off his boots. The blanket fell open, revealing braces around his knees. His eyes followed my every move, but he said nothing. I made him warm milk. My hands trembled so much I spilled half the cup. He watched me, still silent, still small. Later, when I opened his backpack, I found hospital papers. Spinal cord injury, C5-C6, partial quadriplegia. Requires continuous rehabilitation, not suitable for independent living. At the bottom, the physician's note. Recommend long-term care arrangement. I sat there staring at the words until they blurred. This wasn't a visit. It was abandonment dressed as a vacation. When I tucked him into the guest bed, he blinked up at me with eyes too old for 5 years. "Grandma," he whispered. "Are you mad at Mom?" I forced a smile that didn't fit my face. "Oh, no, honey. I'm just cold." But I wasn't cold. I was terrified. As the wind howled outside, I realized I'd been handed the longest fight of my life. a fight not just to raise a child, but to keep him alive. You learn quickly when someone else's life depends on you. I turned my small wooden house into a clinic overnight. The rugs were rolled away to make paths for the wheelchair. I installed handrails in the bathroom, lowered the bed, and lined every shelf with labels so I wouldn't fumble when panic hit. Mornings became a system. No improvising, no accidents allowed. At 7, I drove us to Craig Rehabilitation Hospital in Denver for physical therapy. At noon, I fed him carefully measured doses, mashed food, every bite logged. By afternoon, I taught him letters using magnets on a board, bright colors to keep his focus. Evenings, I read aloud while snowlight flickered across his blanket. Every sound mattered. Every hour mattered. He rarely spoke. Just small nods, sometimes a whisper of yes or no. At first, I thought he didn't like me. Later, I realized silence was his way of surviving. Noise confused him. Changes terrified him. If breakfast came 5 minutes late, his breath hitched. If the heater clicked unexpectedly, he cried. Without sound shoulders, shaking eyes wide with panic. So I built him a world that never changed. Same breakfast, same TV show, same lullaby. To help him understand his day, I created what I called the color system. Blue for calm, yellow for a small change, red for emergency. Every morning I'd hand him 3 stickers. Which one today I'd ask. He'd pick blue, most days his way of saying, "Don't move anything. Keep me safe." It became our secret language. One night his fever spiked so high I thought I'd lose him. I stayed up pressing cold towels to his forehead, whispering promises I wasn't sure I could keep. When his breathing steadied at dawn, he opened his eyes for the first time in hours and said weak, but clear, "Don't leave me, Grandma." Just that. 4 words heavy as the world. I cried into the pillow beside him. That was the first time he spoke more than a single word. Days became weeks, weeks became months. He grew taller but thinner, and I learned to live like a machine. Feed, clean, medicate, repeat. I told myself routine was mercy, that stability was love. Until one afternoon while folding laundry, I found a notebook under his pillow. Inside were shaky lines, written with a crayon, Singy 30. Feed, 7 hour 0. Warm towel, 17 to Dori. Safe. Page after page of times, temperatures, actions. My stomach dropped. "What is this, Calder?" I asked. He looked up from his chair, expression steady. "So I know if things stay right," he said. "If something changes, I can fix it." I didn't know whether to be proud or afraid, but something about his words, his need for order, stayed with me. He wasn't just surviving, he was observing, recording, turning chaos into pattern. I began to see a strange intelligence behind that quiet face, something sharper than logic, deeper than routine. As the years passed, my hands stopped trembling when I cleaned his tubes. I could do it in the dark now. The house ran on a rhythm we both understood. People told me I was strong. I wasn't. I was just disciplined. But discipline kept him breathing, and that was enough. Every night after his machines hummed into rhythm, I'd sit by his bed and whisper, "We made it through another day." Sometimes he would nod, sometimes he'd already be asleep. What I didn't realize was that the same routines saving his life were also shaping something extraordinary inside him. The boy I thought I was keeping alive was already learning how to build his own system, one that would someday save us both. By the time Calder turned 8, I'd already memorized every sound in our house, the hiss of his ventilator, the soft whir of the heater, the hum of the refrigerator. But that year, another sound joined them, the soft, steady click of keys being pressed by his eyes. The rehabilitation center had given us an old eye-tracking device, meant for communication practice. I thought he'd use it to type simple words, but within weeks he was writing sentences, then lists, then questions. He asked about weather patterns, memory exercises, and once how to calculate probability. I taught him Sudoku to keep his mind busy, and he solved grids faster than I could draw them. He began asking for newspaper clippings, scanning headlines about politics and economics, then storing them on his computer in neat folders, labeled by month and tone. I didn't understand what he was doing, but every page he read stayed inside him like a file that never closed. One afternoon, I found a spiral notebook under his tray. On the cover in shaky handwriting, he'd written, "Everything has a pattern, even lies." I asked what it meant. He turned his eyes toward me, calm and deliberate. "I can tell when people lie," he said. His voice came through the synthetic tone of the eye tracker, flat and certain. How I asked. "They blink faster," he replied, "and their breathing changes. Words come too smooth when they're not true." I didn't know whether to be proud or afraid. The more he learned, the more the world irritated him. He would pause mid-conversation with therapists, watching their faces as if studying a code. "She's pretending to care," he told me once after a session. "She smiles only when you look at her." The accuracy in his voice made my stomach tighten. He wasn't being cruel, he was right. When the school board called to discuss transferring Calder to an online program, I argued fiercely. "He deserves to be around other children," I told them. But the principal disagreed. "He's better off in specialized care." Calder interrupted, his voice soft but cutting. "She doesn't want me there because she's afraid of what I make people see." The principal froze. I saw the truth land between them, sharp as glass. That was the first moment I realized my grandson could read people the way others read books. A few months later, I caught him on my old laptop downloading lines of code that looked like gibberish. I panicked thinking he'd broken something, but he said calmly, "I'm learning Python." I tried to hide my surprise. Why, I asked. Because I want to teach machines to tell the truth. Why not teach people, I said, half joking. He blinked once. Because people don't listen. After that, I began saving everything: bank records, therapy notes, school letters, without knowing why. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe I felt the tremor of something coming. Calder's nights stretched longer. Sometimes I woke at 2 a.m. and saw the faint blue light under his door. When I peeked inside, the screen glowed with strings of code flowing like a heartbeat. On the corner of the desk was a small photo of me holding him in the hospital. His face on the screen looked older somehow, as if each new command stripped away the part of childhood he'd missed. He was building something I couldn't name, a quiet empire made of numbers, data, and memory. When I finally asked what he was working on, he said a way to prove what's real. I told myself it was harmless curiosity, that he was simply gifted. But deep down, I knew this was the beginning of something far bigger than either of us could control. I used to think I was teaching him how to survive, but as I watched the code dance across his screen, I realized he was teaching me what truth really looked like. By the start of 2019, Calder was 10 years old and stronger. His reflexes had improved, his posture more stable. Against the doctor's cautious advice, I decided to let him attend Fairview Elementary. I wanted him to feel like a child again, even just for a few hours each day. The morning we rolled through those glass doors, I saw his eyes flicker from the lights to the noise, the clatter of lockers, the echo of sneakers, the squeals of other kids. It was too much too fast, but he didn't flinch. He simply watched, recording everything. At first, things seemed hopeful. His homeroom teacher, Ms. Brennan, promised to make him feel included, but within weeks, complaints began. He doesn't participate, she told me. He ignores instructions. He won't join group work. I tried to explain his sensory limits, his need for structure, but she nodded in that careful, distant way people do when they've already decided. When I was called in to meet the principal, Dana Rutledge, she said, "Mrs. Whitlow, he's an intelligent boy, but this environment may not be ideal. We recommend a specialized setting." Her tone was gentle, her eyes already elsewhere. "If you keep separating him," I replied, "how will he ever learn to belong?" The following week, everything broke. During a math lesson, Ms. Brennan wrote an equation on the board. Calder's computer voice cut through the room. "That's wrong." The children laughed. Ms. Brennan flushed red. "Excuse me?" she snapped. "You made an error," he repeated. She checked, hesitated, and found he was right down to the smallest detail. But humiliation turned her voice cold. "We'll talk about this later." That afternoon, the principal called. "Your grandson corrected his teacher in front of the entire class," she said. "It was disrespectful. I wanted to scream that telling the truth isn't disrespect. But to them, truth from a child like him was rebellion." At home, I asked, "Why didn't you stay quiet?" He looked at me steady and calm, because if I know it's wrong and say nothing, it stays wrong. Then everyone learns the mistake. For him, truth was sacred. For the world, it was dangerous. A week later, the school scheduled an IEP meeting. The conference room was small, cold, the fluorescent lights humming like bees. The principal, the teacher, a counselor, and I sat in a circle around Calder's chair. Dana started the meeting with rehearsed warmth. "We all want what's best for Calder." His synthesized voice interrupted her mid-sentence. "No, you want what's best for yourselves. If I disappear, you won't have to deal with what makes you uncomfortable." The room froze. Ms. Brennan's eyes darted to the table. The counselor shifted in her chair. I felt my breath catch. My 10-year-old had just dissected the entire system in one sentence. No one spoke for a long time. Finally, the principal muttered something about re-evaluating support services. I gathered the papers, all those forms and signatures that pretended to understand him. On the way out, Calder said, "Keep them safe, Grandma. One day we'll need to prove what really happened." That night, I sat at the kitchen table surrounded by binders. Outside, snow began to fall again, soft and relentless, just like the night Brielle left him. I thought about how far we'd come from breathing machines to classrooms, from survival to defiance. I didn't realize then that every report card, every meeting note, every complaint I tucked away would someday become the evidence that saved us. Calder slept peacefully in the next room, his laptop humming on standby. I looked through the doorway and whispered to myself, "They think they're teaching him limits. But he's already learning how to break them all quietly, all in truth." By 2020, the world outside had shut down, but inside our house, life had never been more alive. The pandemic forced everyone indoors, but Calder had always lived that way. For him, isolation wasn't punishment. It was home. School went online. Therapy went virtual. And while other kids struggled to adjust, Calder seemed to find a rhythm that matched his own pulse. He spent hours at his desk, eyes fixed on his monitor, typing with a precision that frightened me. He rarely spoke. The only sounds were the faint clicks of the eye tracker and the hum of his ventilator. At first, I thought he was just learning coding, something harmless to pass the time. But one morning, while making breakfast, I noticed he had categorized every file on my computer bills: medical reports, insurance forms, emails, each labeled with dates and timestamps. "You don't have to do that, sweetheart," I said. "I already keep track." He looked up the machine, forming his words. "People forget. Computers don't." That summer, he told me he was building something. He called it VeriChain. When I asked what it meant, he said it verifies truth. It shows what's real, what's changed, and when. I laughed softly. "And what are you going to do with it?" He stared at the screen, unblinking. "I don't know, I just need it to exist. When someone lies, I want something that can prove it." The calmness in his tone sent a shiver through me. One evening, I walked into his room with tea and saw lines of code scrolling down his monitor. "Want to test it?" he asked. He ran a program on an old Word document from my email backup, one of the letters Brielle had written me years ago after she left him. The screen flashed. "This file has been modified 3 times. My throat went dry. He opened the metadata and showed me how timestamps didn't match. Someone had edited the letter after the date it was sent. The section that said, "I'll come back for him soon," had once read, "I can't do this anymore." I froze, staring at the proof glowing in blue light. "Where did you get this idea?" I whispered. He said, "People can change words, but not patterns. The pattern always remembers." I didn't say anything, but I suddenly realized what his invention really was: a shield against betrayal. Later that week, I found him saving every new piece of mail, every text, every receipt. "Why are you keeping all this?" I asked. He didn't look up. "Because someday someone might say, 'You took something that isn't yours. Then we can prove you didn't.'" I frowned. Who would ever say that? He paused, his voice quiet. "Someone who once left me." That night I couldn't sleep. The house was silent except for the hum of his computer. I stood in the doorway and watched him. The monitor's light painted his face pale blue, his reflection framed by code that pulsed like veins. Next to the keyboard sat the photo of us at the hospital, the same one he'd kept since he was 5. I realized then he wasn't just building software, he was building safety. Every number, every file, every piece of data was a way to make sure that no one could ever erase what we had lived. From that day on, I began keeping records, 2 binders of every transaction, every therapy session, every school report. He helped me encrypt them layer by layer, teaching me as he went. "It's simple," he said once, his voice steady. "Truth just needs a memory that can't be deleted." In my journal, I wrote, "I thought I was preparing him for the future. I didn't realize we were preparing for the past to come back and haunt us." April 2025 began like any other spring until the story broke. News outlets ran headlines about the paralyzed teen from Boulder who built a $5 million app. I begged Calder not to go public, but he said if it's true, it shouldn't hide. Reporters camped outside our fence. Neighbors I hadn't spoken to in years suddenly dropped off congratulations cards. I tried to smile, but something in me ached. For every bright light that found us, there was a shadow waiting to follow. 2 weeks later, the doorbell rang. I opened it and felt time fold in on itself. Brielle stood there, hair perfectly styled heels, clicking on my wooden porch, her perfume too strong for the cold air. "Hi, Mom," she said, voice smooth as glass. "I came to see my son." Behind her was a man in a tailored suit, carrying a briefcase. Graham O'Connell, he introduced himself, legal representative for Ms. Kincaid. I froze. Calder was already in the doorway of his room, eyes fixed on his mother. He didn't blink, didn't move. She hesitated, then smiled as if posing for an audience. "You've grown so much," she said, though her gaze stayed on the machines, not on him. O'Connell placed a stack of folders on my kitchen table. "Our client," he began, "has documentation proving she provided consistent financial support over the last 11 years. He slid copies of bank transfers, receipts, and signed letters across the wood. I stared at them, the paper, crisp and deliberate. Each one had her name. Each one looked authentic. That evening, I called our attorney, Naomi Park. She came the next morning, reviewed the documents, and looked grim. "Zephira," she said quietly, "if you can't disprove these, you might lose guardianship of his finances." The word lose struck like ice. Brielle smiled faintly. "I'm not here to fight," she said. "I just want what's best for Calder and what's rightfully his." That night after they left, I sat in the dark kitchen and cried for the first time in years. Calder's computer voice broke the silence. "Are you scared, Grandma?" "Yes," I whispered. "I'm scared of losing you." He replied, "You can't lose what's already proven. People only lose when they can't prove the truth." His words were strange, almost rehearsed, but something in his tone steadied me. I went to bed but couldn't sleep. Light seeped from under his door until dawn. When I entered his room, he was still awake, his monitor covered in files. On the desk was a single note: "Don't say anything. Let her talk. I'll handle the rest." I touched the keyboard and saw folders processing hundreds of them. Bank statements, hospital records, therapy logs, metadata, timestamps, all being cross-referenced. My chest tightened. He was building his defense before the war had even begun. By noon, Naomi called. "They've filed a motion. The hearing is set for 3 days from now." I swallowed hard. "Do you trust a 16-year-old who types with his eyes?" I asked her. There was a pause, then she said softly, "I trust him if you do." That evening, sunlight poured through the window, landing on the turquoise water bottle Calder kept by his desk, the same one he'd used since childhood. I watched it shimmer and thought of how every stage of his life was stored somewhere in data and memory untouched by lies. I understood then that the battle ahead wasn't about money. It was about proof, about the weight of truth against the convenience of deceit. Outside, the world was talking about our story, but inside our home, only one sound mattered: the quiet hum of his computer, preparing for the storm. And as I stood behind him, I realized something I hadn't said aloud. This fight wasn't mine anymore. It was his. He wasn't the fragile child I'd taken in from the snow that night years ago. He was the one who could turn numbers into testimony, silence into power, and truth into armor. I looked at the turquoise bottle glinting beside his machine and whispered, "Whatever happens next, you've already won." But even as I said it, I knew the hardest part was still coming. The courtroom was bright enough to sting my eyes. Sunlight cut through the high glass panels of the Boulder County Justice Center, painting everything in sterile white. I sat behind Calder's wheelchair, my hand gripping his turquoise water bottle the way a child might hold a charm. He looked calm, too calm for 16. Across the aisle, Brielle walked in like she'd never left chin-high perfume, heavy smile rehearsed. Beside her attorney, Graham O'Connell adjusted his suit and opened a case thick with documents. My lawyer, Naomi Park, gave me a small nod. Her jaw was tight. When the proceedings began, Graham stood and spoke with the poise of someone used to manipulating sympathy. "Your Honor," he said. Turning slightly toward the press in the back, my client is a mother who made a heartbreaking decision years ago, but she never abandoned her child. She's been supporting him in silence all these years. His voice softened. She watched from afar as he overcame unimaginable odds. He lifted a folder, and she has proof, financial records, hospital contributions, and correspondence. He laid them out one by one: bank statements, transfer receipts, emails to the rehabilitation hospital. Every document perfectly aligned, neatly dated each one, hinting at a version of the past that had never happened. Naomi countered as best she could, asking questions requesting verification, but the judge, Marla Hartwell, remained neutral. "Ms. Park," she said, "will need evidence, not speculation." My heart pounded so loud I could barely hear. Naomi leaned close. "Zafira," she whispered, "unless you have legal paperwork showing Brielle renounced custody, we're vulnerable." My hands went cold. I thought of that night years ago, snow on the porch, the echo of an engine fading. I remembered the weight of Calder in my arms, the sound of him asking if his mother would come back. All of it crashing over me again, as if time had folded into itself. Judge Hartwell began to speak, voice measured. "Given the presented documentation, I'm inclined to provisionally assign financial guardianship to the biological mother pending further review." I felt my chest tighten. That was the sound of everything about to vanish our home, his independence, the life we'd built. Then Calder's machine spoke. "Your Honor, may I say something?" His voice was clear, robotic yet steady. Every head turned. "My grandmother doesn't know how to forge documents," he said, "but I know how to prove who did." The judge paused, surprised. "Go on." Calder gestured toward Naomi, who helped connect his laptop to the courtroom screen. A blue interface appeared the same shade as his water bottle. "This is VeriChain," he said. "It verifies authenticity through metadata and digital signatures." His tone was calm, almost instructional. "All of my mother's files were created between April 1st and May 17th, 6 weeks after the news about my app aired. Their metadata shows identical device IDs and timestamps, meaning they were generated in batches, not over years as claimed. Lines of data appeared on the screen: timestamps, geolocations, IP addresses. These letters," he continued, "use fonts introduced in 2023. The scanned receipts have cloned texture artifacts. None of the signatures match the pen pressure from older documents. He clicked again, showing a cross-comparison between hospital payments and real bank transactions under my name. Craig Hospital confirmed that all charges were paid by Zafira Whitlow. On the screen, a single message flashed in bold text. Document origin mismatch detected. Created April 17, 2025. The room fell silent. Even the court reporter stopped typing. Brielle's face hardened. "He's manipulating data," she cried. "I paid cash. Cash doesn't have timestamps." Calder's voice came again, even softer now. "Then you'll have ATM receipts." Graham opened his mouth but closed it just as fast. Judge Hartwell leaned forward. "Do you have those receipts, Ms. Kincaid?" Brielle stared at the floor. Naomi stepped forward. "Your Honor, permission to display the signature comparison." Calder enlarged two signatures, the real one from a 2014 document and the forged one from 2025. Even to my untrained eye, they were different. Different slant, different weight. Judge Hartwell exhaled slowly. "I've seen enough." Brielle collapsed into her chair, tears streaking the foundation on her cheeks. "I just wanted to be his mother again," she said, voice breaking. "I just wanted someone to see me." Calder looked at her for a long time, his expression unreadable. "I used to want to call you Mom," he said, "but you didn't listen." I felt tears spill down my face, not from victory, but from the ache of everything we'd both lost. He had finally said what I'd been too afraid to for over a decade. Judge Hartwell cleared her throat. "The court finds that all documents presented by Miss Kincaid are falsified. Full guardianship, financial and medical, remains with Zafira Whitlow. The case is referred to the district attorney for possible criminal charges." The gavel came down with a soft crack. It didn't sound like triumph. It sounded like release. As the courtroom emptied, I sat still behind Calder, the turquoise bottle cool in my hand. We hadn't won anything. We'd simply protected what was true. And sometimes that's all victory ever means. 2 months later, the world had moved on, but our house hadn't changed. Brielle received a suspended sentence and 400 hours of community service at a rehabilitation center for disabled children. I told the court I didn't want revenge. I just wanted peace. Calder's story spread everywhere. Tech blogs called him the teen who taught truth to AI. Universities offered scholarships. Investors flooded his inbox. He declined them all. I don't want to build something for people who already have everything he said. I want to build something for those who don't. Together, we founded a small company, a software verification firm that hired only people with disabilities. Calder led it from his chair eyes, commanding screens, voice calm but firm. I managed the logistics, mostly making sure he ate and rested, which he often forgot. Within months, his system became the backbone for nonprofit audits and digital archives. Headlines called him the boy who rebuilt digital trust, but to me, he was just the child who once asked if his mother would return. One afternoon, I visited the rehabilitation center to sign a donation agreement. In one of the rooms, I saw her Brielle. She was sitting on the floor reading aloud to a little boy who couldn't move his arms. Her voice was gentle, her hair tied back. When she looked up and saw me through the glass, she froze. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then she gave a faint nod. Not apology, not plea, just acknowledgement. I nodded back. It was enough. That evening, Calder was coding when I got home. "If your mom's really changed," I asked, "would you forgive her?" He didn't look away from the screen. "If she tells the truth, I don't need to forgive her. The truth forgives itself." His words stayed with me long after he went back to work. At dinner that night, he placed something in the middle of the table, the old turquoise water bottle. It was scratched. Faded, the same one he'd carried since he was a boy. "You always picked blue," he said. "You said it kept things calm. I'm keeping it now, so you'll know everything's okay." I touched the bottle, its surface cool and familiar. Under the light, the scratches shimmered like tiny stars. I looked at him, sitting upright in his chair. eyes focused and sure. 11 years ago, I said softly, I was afraid of losing you. He turned toward me. And now you've taught me that we never really lose the people we love. We just hold on to what's real. Outside, snow had begun to fall again, thin, quiet flakes drifting past the window. Calder rolled his chair toward the porch and stopped by the glass door. The turquoise bottle sat beside him, catching the reflection of the night sky. Later, when I wrote in my journal, the words came easily. Justice doesn't just live in law, it lives in memory. A mother left her child. The child proved the truth. And a grandmother stood between them long enough for both to find their way back to the light. Sometimes one sentence is all it takes for truth to defend itself. Just let her talk. Because in the end, truth doesn't need to shout. It only needs to be seen.